SL is Mercedes-Benz's flagship. That's a term thrown around often to describe a halo model that's meant to debut new design, new technology, new thinking that can then trickle down to the lineup's lesser cars. The high watermark for the Mercedes SL is this, the R129. But strangely, it didn't debut new styling, it came last. The 129 arrived at the end of an entire generation of Mercedes known as the Sacco-era, all of which stood above the rest of the entire automotive industry in both style and substance. The SL was supposed to come first, but its development was put on hold for almost a decade because Mercedes didn't have the resources to finish it. And yet, somehow, whether equipped with a 7,000 RPM straight six and dogleg manual, or a 4-cam hot rod V8, or the contemporary world's most advanced V12, it's not only the once best car in the world, but it's also today's most perfect collectible. And so my question is all of that in spite of the delays, or is it because of the delays? If you drive your cars on the road, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when something will happen. Hagerty's guaranteed value insurance lets you agree on your classic car's value before something happens, not when it's already too late, so your car can get back out on the road where it belongs. Get a free quote at jasonsentme.com. There really are two lineages for the Mercedes SL. One is a single car, the 300 SL, where SL stood for super light. It was a lightweight, space-framed racing car that was turned into a street car and became a gull-winged legend. It had no follow-up for half a century until maybe the SLR McLaren, SLS AMG, and AMG GT. The second lineage is a series of posh convertible roadsters that are neither particularly sporty nor light. Two words that many people and Mercedes itself have incorrectly asserted are what the initials SL stand for. The first generation made its debut at the same time as the road-going 300 SL, and it shared that race car's design language, but none of its racy nature, consisting of a chassis based on a luxury sedan and paired with an anemic 4-cylinder engine. The second generation is known as the Pagoda for its hardtop's characteristic shape. Once again, it used the underpinnings from the S-Class, but addressed its predecessor's lack of power with a 6-cylinder that got halfway to the horsepower of the 300 SL. The next SL again followed the same formula. It was based on the outgoing S-Class, but it now had V8 firepower. It created an 18-year-long cultural moment, amassing 59 pages of appearances in TV and movies, according to the Internet Movie Cars database. The 107 was only meant to have a 9-year run. It went into production in 1971, and work on its replacement began just a few years later. By 1974, that replacement, codenamed R129, was shaping up to look like this. Unfortunately, the US government had other plans. It instituted strict fuel economy and emissions rules in 1975, and Mercedes had no choice but to abandon the R129's development. Far more important to the survival of the company in the all-important US market was a new family of small cars and a new family of fuel-efficient, smaller engines. And so the lion's share of Mercedes engineering resources were diverted instead to the W201 baby Benz, kicking off an entire generation of cars inextricably linked to a man named Bruno. This was the beginning of the Sacco-era at Mercedes-Benz. It's not often that a designer gets credit for a whole car, but Bruno Sacco wasn't a designer. And if you've never seen a sketch of some hot concept done by him, it's because this is what his sketches looked like. No, Sacco was an engineer, not a designer. But he was born in Italy, where even the engineers love beautiful things. Bruno Sacco studied mechanical engineering, and then after unsuccessful stints at both Ghia and Pininfarina, ultimately wound up in Germany for what he assumed would be a short stint. In 1958, at just 24 years old, Sacco was hired by Mercedes-Benz to work in the design department, which was just a division of the body engineering department. 5 years later, he switched over to safety engineering, and 4 years after that, was promoted to run the experimental safety vehicle program. This position resulted in the C111 rolling technology testbed, and the department designed, refined, and tested dozens of safety features that wound up in production cars, like ABS, airbags, seatbelt pretensioners, belt force limiters, hydraulic impact-absorbing bumpers, bonded windscreens, headlight wipers. The list goes on. After 11 years of working in safety, Sacco was promoted to chief engineer. And then a year later, in 1975, just as the US was cooking up those fuel economy standards, he was promoted to design chief. From the moment I became head of design, he said, I put down my pens and became a manager of minds. Under his watch, design became its own department for the very first time at Mercedes-Benz. But because of his experience in safety and all of his engineering background, he wasn't just stood there with a pen designing cars. I want something fabulous. Oh, there it is. Che bella macchina. No, Sacco's genius was his ability to merge interdisciplinary teams of design, engineering, and safety. And so, for example, while it's easy to assume that those taillights are ribbed just for looks, they weren't done for looks at all. That was safety. See, the ribs dramatically increased the light output when the taillights were dirty or covered in snow. Safety first. In the Sacco era, nothing was there for looks. Everything was safety first, engineering led, timeless design. The first clean sheet design of the Sacco era was the 201. And since the baby Benz had no immediate predecessor, the team wasn't bound by convention. In my younger days, said Bruno Sacco, I declared that Mercedes saloons were boring. The time had come to modernize the monotonous cars and break all of the rules. And break all of the rules, he did. The W201 looks conventional a literal half-century after it was designed, and it's partially because it catapulted automotive design 20 years into the future. It and the W124 E-Class, which was effectively the same car scaled up, were masterclasses in proportions and detailing, as well as aerodynamics, safety, and dynamics. While the R129 was a 124 E-Class sedan underneath, it was also another evolution of that same design language. So let's get back to the SL. Officially, R129 development was paused in 1976, with the car delayed from 1981 to 1987, and then 1988, and then 1989. But work had never actually stopped on this new SL. These pictures, for example, are from 1976, while Mercedes was deciding whether to make an SL-based coupe, as had been done with the C107 SLC. The following year, they experimented with basing the 129 on the smaller 201 instead. The decision was ultimately no, but work on the R129 started back up full steam 5 years later, in 1982, right as the 201 was hitting the market. And the SL's design was done, frozen, and approved in 1984, right as the W124 entered production. The new SL would be available with 6-cylinder power as the 300 SL and V8 power as both the 420 SL or 560 SL. Plus, you could have a side dish of extra clatter with the 300 SL turbo diesel, which the marketing folks killed off really quickly. But things got strange at the top end of the power offering too. Mercedes had just seen enormous success with the Cosworth 4-valve heads on the 190e 2.316, which had set a ton of speed records at Nardo. And so the board approved development of 4-valve heads for both the straight 6 and the new V8s. The power gains from the 4-valve heads meant a need for wider tires and bigger wheels to fit more powerful brakes. So, 6 months after the design freeze, when nothing should be changed at all, Sacco and his team had to go back and redesign the car for the upgraded rolling stock. Broad, bulging fenders would do the trick and had the added effect of making the 129 even better looking. The new 4-valve heads took inspiration from the Cosworth 16-valve, adding variable valve timing on the intake side. The new M104 straight 6 revved to the same 7,000 RPM as the Cosworth 4 did, making almost as much specific power in the process. From 3 liters, it made 228 horsepower, which is 1 horsepower more than the old 5.5-liter V8 from the outgoing 560 SL, and it was mated to a 5-speed dogleg manual gearbox to emphasize its sporty nature, appropriate for the first car to wear a 300 SL badge since the original Gullwing. Dogleg. The planned new 560 SL used that same head design and variable valve timing on the old 5.5-liter V8, and was in the process of racking up 441,394 kilometers of testing installed in mules. That is until BMW messed it all up by shoving Germany's first V12 engine in 50 years into its 7 Series. Mercedes would never admit that they pay attention to what BMW does, but of course they do. And so you could bet your bottom Deutschmark that in 1986, their official internal response was something along the lines of, "Fine, yeah, we don't care. But we will build a V12 too." Excuse me. Well, that would be bad enough, but then Mercedes learned that BMW would be installing that V12 into its flagship 8 Series coupe and showing it to the public just a few months after the SL. And so you can imagine Mercedes' reaction was, "Really? You don't say. Okay."
Now we make the war.
And so 4 months after approval to start working on the V12, sales successfully campaigned to modify both the engine and the SL for an unplanned marriage.
And a war against the BMW.
Adding the V12 meant one more engine than the SL's lineup had room for, so the planned 420 SL was killed off. And the 4-cam 560 SL would be too close in displacement and output to the V12 600 SL. The solution was to de-stroke the 560 engine down to just 5.0 liters, the same size as BMW's V12. However, with 4 valves per cylinder, 4 camshafts, and variable valve timing, this V8 made 10% more power than BMW's V12. Now called just the 500 SL, its 322 horsepower was enough to crown this the most powerful production road-going Mercedes engine ever. And the engine was capable of a lot more than that. Before it was even installed in a production car, Mercedes slapped 2 turbos on the M119 and handed it over to Sauber, who installed it in their Group C race car. Running 20 pounds of boost for qualifying, it made 925 horsepower. Restricted to just 12 psi for the 24-hour endurance race at Le Mans, it made 700 horsepower and 610 pound-feet of torque, enough to win the race outright, finishing in first and second places. Not a bad start for the new engine. By the time the R129 made its debut at the 1989 Geneva Motor Show, the 5-liter M119 V8 had racked up an additional 765,701 test kilometers, to say nothing of the 5 million test kilometers for the car itself. During this car's gestation, Mercedes' already enormous R&D staff had swelled by 50%. And so the new family of engines was just one small part of this car's enormous list of innovations. Sacco's experience in the safety lab and the extended development time led Mercedes to the goal that this would be the world's first convertible to offer the same level of crash safety as a closed car. And not just any closed car, a closed Mercedes-Benz. To protect against rollover, the A-pillar was strengthened to withstand the weight of the car several times over, supplemented by an automatically deploying pop-up roll bar made of high-tensile steel, some 3 times stronger than regular steel, lined in polyurethane foam and then trimmed to match the interior. Using damped spring units, it would deploy in 0.3 of a second if the car experienced an impact of greater than 4G in any direction, or if it lifted a rear wheel while tilted at an angle greater than 26 degrees. It worked regardless of the top being up, down, or if the standard hardtop was installed. And of course, the perpetually nervous could deploy it electrically in a few graceful seconds at the touch of a button. To ensure everyone stayed put in the unlikely event of a rollover, the seat frames were made from a 5-piece die-cast magnesium part that was twice as strong as it needed to be to pass government regulations. The seatbelt was integrated into the seat, and the shoulder belt's height was electrically adjusted together with the headrest. Now, the engineering problem with having a seatbelt in the seat is that if the whole thing folds forward during a crash, well, then you don't have a seatbelt at all. So Mercedes even installed an interlock that prevented the seat from being folded once the vehicle was in motion. They really did think of everything. Mercedes boasted that the R129's chassis was as rigid as many sedans, and German car magazine Auto, Motor und Sport actually tested that claim. At 8,650 Newton meters per degree, it was, in fact, about as torsionally stiff as the W201, itself a high watermark, while the other convertibles they tested ranged from barely half that stiff to only 1/4 as strong. Everything was done for safety, even the incredibly mesmerizing extending monowiper, designed to cover almost the entire windshield. And there were so many other things that were cool, like the battery is located in the right rear corner of this car, not the front left, where so many other automakers put the battery. That's because Mercedes research showed 40% of all collisions involve this corner of the car, and you don't want the battery to get hit, because that could mean no airbags, no lighting after a crash, or worse, an explosion sending caustic battery acid everywhere. That might etch some paint. The SL had every safety and dynamic feature available: ABS, locking diff, traction, and eventually stability control with dynamic brake force distribution, adaptive shocks, and self-leveling suspension, all in the name of secure handling and stability. The 129 was also a luxury car, and so it had luxury features unlike the world had ever seen, including the first fully automatic roof, not a single latch to touch here, just one little button that commanded a computer of 8 massive kilobytes of memory. It would, at the touch of that button, roll down the windows and then activate a network of 59 electrical connectors, some of which powered a 180-bar hydraulic pump that sent hydraulic fluid through 50 meters of lines through 90 connectors that would actuate 12 hydraulic rams through the use of 17 limit switches to unlatch, open the roof, open the storage binnacle, fold the roof, close the storage binnacle, and then finally roll the windows up when you were all done. And if that wasn't enough, there was a wind stop that would allow you to have a lovely conversation at 150 miles an hour on the Autobahn with barely a breeze. That is luxury. Oh, I'm rich. It had infrared remote control locking that worked from up to 19 feet away. And it would lock not only the doors, trunk, and fuel filler door, but also the glove box, the cigarette cubby, the center console storage bin, the door panel storage bins, and 2 big storage cubbies behind the seats. Go ahead and park your SL top down in a bad neighborhood. No one was stealing your schnitzel. 3 memory buttons, one for you, one for your wife, and the third for your secretary. This was the 90s, after all, and they commanded everything that was power, including the seats. And that included also the seatbelt height and headrest, which were electrically adjustable, tilt and telescope wheel, and of course the exterior mirrors, but also the interior mirror, which was power. Mercedes. 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 On the German Autobahn, speed was luxury too. The dogleg manual 300 SL might have been comparably dog slow in acceleration, but thanks to Sacco's obsession with aerodynamics, it would still do 150 miles an hour. The 500, on the other hand, exploded off the line like a hot rod, blowing away actual lightweight sports cars with a sub-6-second run to 60. Plus, it needed to be electronically restrained to 155 miles an hour. But if you wanted to be true Autobahn royalty, there was, of course, the V12, which dispensed with Ferraris and just about everything else. The 600 SL arrived 2.5 years late because the V12 was added so late in the development cycle. With 6 liters, 4 cams, 2 of which were variable in timing, 12 cylinders, and 48 valves, it was literally 2 of the 300 SL straight 6s, but in a milder state of tune to prioritize low-end torque. It, like the V8, revved to only 6 grand, but that was enough for 389 horsepower and an insane 420 pound-feet of torque. And though the magazines back in the day all harped on the extra weight, something was really wrong, because I just weighed all 3 of these cars, and without its panoramic hardtop on it, this very late post-facelift 600 with active suspension and all kinds of other features on it weighs only 218 pounds more than the 500, and just 259 pounds more than the stick-shift 6-cylinder. The fact is, the M120 V12 was very light. It was all aluminum, and its block weighed just 1 pound more than Audi's, quote, lightweight V6. And this is, for the record, the only road-going 4-cam V12 that Mercedes has ever made. And with the right exhaust, one of the best-sounding engines ever. The engineering was awe-inspiring. The speed was intoxicating. But let's be realistic here. The reason you'd buy a 129 was because of how it looked. The SL drew crowds wherever it went, with period reviews all talking of being mobbed by gawkers. It became an instant cultural moment, featured in movies, television shows,
engineered like no other car,
and royal scandals. Princess Diana had Buckingham Palace's knickers in a twist for driving one, the first time a royal had ever selected a personal car not the product of a British manufacturer. Everybody wanted a 129. There were wait lists across the globe, stretching up to 5 years in some markets. And surely some of that was due to pent-up demand, thanks to its predecessor's impossibly long 18-year production run. But on the other hand, cynically viewed, the SL was little more than a 2-seat convertible roadster with styling and a chassis based on a pair of entry-level Mercedes sedans that had already been on sale for almost a decade. In other words, it shouldn't have been that big of a deal, and yet it was a huge one. Mercedes ultimately found almost 205,000 homes for the R129 over its 13 model years, at the end of which its design dated back 30 years. And where technology is concerned, the development process took so long that it spanned multiple generations of platforms, engines, and even management structures within Mercedes-Benz. Had this car come out in 1981, as originally planned, it wouldn't have had the electric roof or any of the other safety and luxury features that were invented in the intervening years. Nor would it have been based on the baby Benz, with that car's pioneering 5-link rear suspension. No, the R129 would have been nigh on 2 generations older underneath, and thus it would have missed out on all of the developments between the mid-70s and late 1980s, that era of peak automotive innovation that catapulted Mercedes-Benz to the top of the automotive world, for what would be, as of today anyway, the very last time. Bruno Sacco described it as the most perfect car of his career. As journalists were cautioned against using the word perfect, but that's exactly what Car and Driver did when they said, describing this car is a one-word exercise: perfection. And then they went on to call it the ultimate convertible, if not the ultimate car. It has every ingredient necessary to be $1 million car. Beautiful, reliable, well-built, great to drive. But as students of economic supply and demand theory will tell you, the sheer number of R129s produced keeps that value repressed to a fraction of what it could be, or what it should be, making the ultimate car affordable. And that's why the 129 is the ultimate collectible. The only thing left to decide is which one to drive: the 7,000 RPM dogleg 6, that violent V8, or the turbine-smooth V12. Oh darn, I'm gonna have to drive all 3.